On a Saturday in 1981, all in one chunk, I saw The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby. Have you heard of that?
I was there.
This was the drill. You showed up at 2 o'clock, and part one was from 2 to 6 or something like that, and then they gave you about an hour to feed yourself, and then you came back at 7 or so, and it went until midnight-ish. And it was, in theory, going to be a long, taxing day. At midnight that night, after spending 8.5 hours with the Royal Shakespeare Company, I stumbled home to 57th Street, where I lived at the time, in an apartment about the size of this index card. We've all lived in apartments like that. We should explain for the people who are watching this on film that this is New York City. This is sort of like a large apartment. And there was this new thing back in 1981 called cable TV. And I had a little television, and I walked home, opened the door, sat down sort of dazed, and flipped on the television. And there was this channel called CBS Cable. It's now A&E, but it began life just about that time in '81 as CBS Cable, and there was a guy in a tuxedo who had a limp, I remember, doing his best impersonation of Alistair Cook, and he would limp to the camera and introduce the next thing that you would see without commercial interruption, which was a whole new concept in 1981. And it was generally programming that they bought from the BBC. And I got in just about midnight, and it was the hour, so he came limping to the camera, and he said, "And now the Royal Shakespeare Company production of Chekhov's Three Sisters." And they start running the credits, and it's all the people who I had just watched for 8.5 hours in Nicholas Nickleby. So I thought, ooh, I made myself something English like tea, and I sat down and I watched 3 hours of Three Sisters, 1 hour each, and then Three Sisters is over, and now here comes the guy towards the camera again, and he says, "And now the Royal Shakespeare Company production of the Scottish play." I say the Scottish play because this is technically still a theater that we're in, so you all know what I mean. And the credits start to roll, and it's all the same actors. So now it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sun is coming up, and I've had so much tea that my eyes are like wired open. But I've spent about 24 hours now with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Principally among them were the charm and the effervescence and the dashing good looks and the inarguable talent of the fellow sitting next to me. And that sounded good, didn't it? And I thought, well, that's that. And I did what any child would do at the time. I turned my little apartment into a shrine to him. There was a place nearby called Applause Books where you could get pictures of people from the Royal Shakespeare Company. And you could get posters from plays at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And it was only about 3 square feet of wall space anyway, so it was like one photograph and half of a poster, and it was a shrine. Oddly, improbably, almost a year later, on September 23rd, 1982, I found myself working at an advertising agency, doing ad campaigns for Broadway shows. And one of them was this new thing that was coming from London that everyone was very excited about, but no one had seen, about cats. And having worked on the ad campaign, you've all heard of Now and Forever, I contributed the "and" in Now and Forever, because it was a collaboration. And I got to go to the dress rehearsal of this Cats thing that everyone was so excited about. And in those days, dress rehearsals weren't the big deals that they are now, with theaters full of people and friends and family and everybody screaming. This was just people who were working on the show. It's the Winter Garden Theater, about 50 people and 75 cats. And I'm sitting there on the aisle, And walking down the aisle comes Roger Rees. He, of course, goes right down front because he knows Trevor Nunn and Johnny Napier and Gillian Lynn and Andrew Lloyd Webber, and they're all down there. And I think, that's the guy I've turned my apartment into a shrine for. This is incredible. And I said to the kid sitting next to me, my intern, a gentleman who's now a Broadway producer named Hal Luftig, who was working for me in those days, and I said, "Do you know who that is?" And he said, "Oh yeah, that's Roger Rees. Last year when he was here doing Nickleby, he taught me at Columbia. I was a student at Columbia, and he taught on Mondays and Tuesdays when they didn't have the show." And I said, "Oh well, when this Cats thing is over, you're going to introduce me to Roger." So it's all on account of Cats, therefore, that I am sitting here before you today. Roger, on the other hand, is sitting before you today for reasons that predate Cats, going back probably 20 years before that to the early 60s, when you were a prize-winning fine artist, were you not?
Yeah, I was. We lived in South London, and it was a time of great upheaval. For a community who'd fought the way through the Second World War, suddenly to be confronted by people quite rightly coming from other countries claiming their bit of Great Britain. So people from Trinidad, people from India started to come to Great Britain, and it was in South London where I lived. It was a pretty tough experience, and I found myself at this school which was called Balham County Secondary Modern. It was called. I found myself retreating to the art room because I was kind of talented. I was artistic. And so I had a good teacher, a man called Mr. Voigt, I think his name was. And so I was encouraged to paint and do things, and I really spent all my time in the art room. And they sent some of my drawings to the Camberwell School of Fine Art. I got in there. I knew I was good because someone had stolen some of my pictures. So I thought, oh, that's good. And then you do this funny thing on the first day when you go to that sort of art school. You go, you're given an armature and you're given a big daub of clay, and they give you the clay. You stick it on the armature, this piece of metal, and they put a model in the middle of the room. And there's a ring of new students trying to imitate the head of the model, this lady in the middle of the room. And all the professors and the faculty stand around the room smiling. And you can't quite understand why until you finish your work after about an hour and a half. You think you've captured her likeness. And they all point out to you that what you've made is a picture of yourself. Because you're so used to your face, you're not, you can't discern anything. You know, that's the only face you've ever looked at all your life. It's a great, great lesson. It's the first lesson you learn in art schools, that you're so full of yourself, you've got to get over it. I was there for about 3 years, and then I went to, I learned at lunchtimes to drink alcohol. I was getting good, you know, it was good. And then, and I used to have rum and blackcurrant. And I could never understand why people used to look at me in the afternoons in a rather saucy way. And that's because the rum was delicious, but the blackcurrant left a big red mark on your lips. And so you look rather attractive in the afternoons, I think. But I then tried to get into the Slade School of Fine Art, which is the finest drawing school in the whole of Britain, in the whole of Europe, I would say. It's founded by William Coldstream, extraordinary, a lot of American, wonderful American, Larry Rivers, Kitai, you know, lots of people taught there, fantastic. And I got in there, and I was going to be a fine artist. And I did 3 years there. My 4th year, my father died, so I had to leave there and do what I'd done in the vacations, which was to paint scenery, but professionally. And so I painted scenery to support my mother and my brother. And I did that all over Great Britain. Towards the end of that year, I was painting scenery in a theatre in South London, where I don't know if you know how you paint scenery. It's a craft that's sort of going out of fashion, really, because you imitate moldings and bumpy objects on flat canvas. It's a hard thing to do and a very interesting thing to do. But I was painting on a paint frame 40 foot up above the stage floor in a completely empty theatre called Wimbledon Theatre. And the actor manager who ran that theatre, one of the last actor managers ever in the whole world, Mr. Arthur Lane, wonderful man, so encouraging to me, walked across the stage unbeknownst to me, and I was painting away a sort of toy shop scene from pantomime. And he called up to me in an actor manager voice. He said, "Young lad, I have a question for you." And oh my goodness, Mr. Lane, I didn't see you there. I'm sorry. Would you like to be in a play the week after next? So I was so flattered, I said yes, and I've never painted scenery since. And actor managers are wily people. He gave me £4 a week for being in the play, and I got £3 a week for painting scenery. So it was a little step up, I think. But he wanted a 17-year-old boy to be in a play. That's all he wanted. He played the fathers in this weekly rep that he ran. Agatha Christie plays, popular plays, and he always played the father. He was so busy running the theatre, he never had time to learn his lines, but he knew everything about theatre. He'd been an actor all his life. He was an extraordinary actor, rather like Donald Wolfett or, that sort of person. And so he would simply take the script, the Samuel French script, and arriving late at the dress rehearsal, he would rip up the script and put a bit on the mantelpiece, and he put a bit on the coffee table, and there would be a little bit of it left to go on the armchair over there. And his performance always was, "Well, I see the vicar has been here this evening," and he'd climb his way around the theatre. It was amazing. But he was a wonderful man, and he was so supportive to me. And at Christmas that first year, I auditioned for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I didn't get in. There's an interesting thing. In about 3 weeks' time, I'm going to do my one-man show in London. And I'm doing my one-man show for 3 weeks in the West End at the Apollo Theatre. And it was at that Apollo Theatre, at that Christmas holiday, I didn't get into the Royal Shakespeare Company. So it's kind of funny. And then I went away to Scotland, and I made some scenery for people, and I made some props, and made myself generally useful as a stage manager. And one of the actors was ill, had a terrible, problematic ear thing happen, and he couldn't carry on, so I found myself playing Yasha in The Cherry Orchard, and Bruno in Dear Charles, a very funny play, and lots of other wonderful young man's parts, and I got a little better and a little bit more confident. The reason they didn't want me in the Royal Shakespeare Company was because my voice was weak, and so I worked on that a bit, and then I came back, did a bit more work with Arthur Lane, and then auditioned again at the end of that year, and I was doing a pantomime for Arthur Lane with I danced the front half of the cow. I did lots of things. And I auditioned for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I got in this time.
With whom did you audition?
For Trevor Nunn and John Barton and Terry Hands. And I auditioned with my dear friend Ben Kingsley. Yeah. Sir Ben. Yeah, because it's Ben. We joined the Royal Shakespeare Company together. We the first play we were in was The Taming of the Shrew. We played silent, non-speaking huntsman in The Taming of the Shrew, and we were good. In fact, we were so good that we went on to play silent, non-speaking huntsman in almost every Shakespeare play. Yeah, but. We eventually learned our craft. We carried spears and shields and Dame Peggy Ashcroft around the stage, and eventually both of us got individually to play Hamlet for the Royal Shakespeare Company some 20 years later. So we worked our way up from, in those days there were about 60 people as extranumeraries, people who just stood in the background, and we were of that company. And then we gradually got understudy roles and proved ourselves. And you understand, as a fine artist, I'd never spoken in my life because my work represented what I thought. I was somebody who'd never spoken. So when I first started to rehearse,
You're making up for it tonight.
well, yeah, right. This is it. I have had an actor's education. You know, I really didn't. I was scared to speak to anybody. And then when I joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, they'd all go to lunch, and I would run up to the library in Stratford-upon-Avon and look up words like iambic pentameter and things like that, because I didn't know anything about that. That was the beginning of being in the Royal Shakespeare Company, and gradually working my way as a spear carrier from the gloom at the edge of the stage to the place where all actors want to be, which is in the bright light in the middle. You know.
Do you remember your first speaking role?
I played Fenton after about 3 years who was the sort of juvenile lead in The Merry Wives of Windsor.
So what you're saying is, for 3 years, you were a spear carrier.
I was a mute.
And did you understudy during those
Yeah,
years?
I understudied parts like Tranio in Taming of the Shrew. Never went on. I only ever went on once, and that was in an American play by Arthur Coppett called Indians, and I went on for Billy the Kid one night. We did perhaps 8 Shakespeare plays and 13 contemporary plays, many from the European traditions and a lot of American plays too.
So for 3 years you were an ensemble member, let's say.
I was, yeah.
And yet you stayed with the RSC. What made you stay? The promise of playing roles, of speaking roles, the promise of moving to center stage, as you said? Or why didn't you go somewhere where you could play parts?
Well, for someone...
Because we don't have something like the Royal Shakespeare Company in this country. We don't have a national theater in this country. We have instead a government that thinks that the arts are for sissies and morons, and so our country as a country doesn't do much to support the arts. The arts are supported by individuals and corporations who are looking to attach themselves to worthy causes so that they can advertise that they've attached themselves to worthy causes, which is great for the worthy cause.
They get something out of it, right?
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
But so explain to us, because we don't have something like the RSC, what the RSC in particular was able to offer you as a young apprentice actor.
Well, I'll go back to that, but I just had a polyp, which is a good evidence of that there is no difference between arts funding, both here in America and in Great Britain, in that Nicholas Nickleby came out of the fact that Trevor said to us one day, they're going to close we had 2 theatres, one at Stratford-upon-Avon and one at the Aldwych Theatre in London, before we moved to the Barbican, and we used that theatre, and then eventually we left the Barbican because it was an inconvenient theatre in the end. It didn't work as well as this wonderful farce house, the Aldwych Theatre, which was a most beautiful theatre house which had housed the international theatre festivals, and it was a place that everybody wanted to perform in because it was big enough for a good-sized house, but you could be intimate in it, and it was great for Shakespeare. But the government wanted to cut our Arts Council grant in half, which meant that we could no longer go to London. We could only work at Stratford-upon-Avon. And it was just at the end of a year, and Trevor said, we have to find something to do that's going to cost no money. That's where Nicholas Nickleby came from. It was out of the public, it was within the public gift, this book, this 800-page book. We used the actors we had. The scenery was just stuff we had around, and the costumes all came from the back of Berman and Nathan's costume house in London, and they were ragged old clothes falling apart from the 1920s. And they always fell apart, but they looked so real, it was spectacular. It was fantastic. But with just such an assemblage of materials, we made something that people come up to the street and say to me, well, that changed my life, you know. It changed my life too. But that was my little polyp. So there is no difference really. But however, why I didn't leave, there was no option, because really, I mean, I was in the greatest company in the world, even though I was just moving scenery and learning to play poker and, getting acquainted with Guinness and things like that. You know, in those days, everybody drank in the wings. Everybody drank continually, you know, smoked cigarettes, drank, and then went on and did the last act of these incredible plays. Extraordinary. We got so tired working there. You know, I remember in Julius Caesar, I was killed very early at the Battle of Philippi as one of the soldiers, and I thought you would every night would fall asleep under my shield, and I'd be woken up by the applause at the end of the play. It was tough. You had to really keep at it. But it was a great education. But what it was something that you don't have nowadays because of this thing that's looking at me over there with the red light on it. Because of the camera, because of the close-up, now, unlike when I joined the theatre, which were the days when 45-year-old people could play Romeo, and a lady of some, 38 years could play Juliet quite convincingly. Now it's got to be a 17-year-old guy and a 15-year-old girl or something, because the camera is this close. I was one of the people who was serving an apprenticeship system. I was part of the apprenticeship system there. It was incredible. It was like being at some sort of conservatoire. Ian Richardson, Ian Holm, Alan Howard, Donald Sinden, Judi Dench, Ian McKellen, they'd all worked through it before me, and I was one of the last people. Ben and myself were some of the last people. Michael Gwilym, Nicholas Grace, a few of us. David Warner had just done it before us, and they were there for many, many years. And each year, if you were good and a good company member, and you were audacious, and there's three words that haunt me all my life, really, and it's loving, demanding, and frank. And you've got to be these three things all the time when you're an actor. You've got to care about things, but you've got to be a little bit audacious. And they looked for that there. And I think if they saw the possibility that you could actually grow as an actor, it was a perfect place to do that. And so some people stayed for 20 years. When I first joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, there was a man called Terence Greenwich, who was 83 years old. He wasn't very together. The year before that, they'd done Henry V, and the way they changed from the French armies to the English armies in that production was they wore red tabards, which were reversible, and they had blue on the other side. And so all the English army would go off in the red tabards, and they take them off and put them on again on the blue side, and they come on as the French army. Except for Terence Greenwich, who always got it the wrong way round. So in every English scene, there was always one French soldier just over there, and vice versa. But I was a member of this incredible thing, this incredible apprentice. I was an apprentice, and I was learning, and it was the most exciting thing in the world. I imagined that I would be there for the rest of my life. That would be my dream. And the thing about being an actor is, unlike being a ballet dancer or a soccer player, football player, you don't stop when you're 28. You can keep on going till you can start off as Mamilius in The Winter's Tale, the young son in that play, and you can finish up as the grave digger in Hamlet. It's a wonderful, wonderful life if you can keep at it. Do you know? So that's what I was hooked on, and that was the idea that kept me there. But I will say there was nothing else much. I mean, I wasn't very confident. I only about after 6 years did I actually manage to attract an agent. So I was really just, they were using me and I was using them, really. But I was educated by Cicely Berry and John Barton. I eventually became John Barton's sonnet person because he seemed to think that I could do sonnets plainly. And Cicely Berry, the great voice teacher of all time. If you've read her books, you'll know why. And a woman who just opened up the world to me. So I was being educated. And I learned to fence, I learned to dance, I learned to sing, as well as I could. And so it was it was like being at school again. Yeah.
Would you grace us with an example of a simple sonnet?
No, you don't want to hear.
Wouldn't we like to hear a simple sonnet?
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose something of that thing thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. I missed a bit in the middle. But that's the theory of Shakespeare. When I joined the company, there were lots of men, older men in the company. One man, Nicholas Selby, used to, he would play the Earl of Northumberland or something like that in a play, and he'd come out to the younger actors and he'd say, "Oh, listen, old boy, will you say these 10 lines? No one's going to notice. It's just too much for me. I don't want." He'd give bits of his part away to younger actors. It's good, isn't it? And we all learn to do that thing I just did in the middle there, which is just keep going. If you forget it, just no one knows, so just keep going. That's all right.
There was also something you learned about lace-up boots.
Oh, well, I have several rules about Shakespeare, and one is never wear long lace-up boots in the last act. Because if you've been really bad in the play that night, you can never get them off quick enough, because people will come round. People come to the dressing room. It'll take too long to get the boots off, and you'll get people coming around and saying, "Oh, you were very interesting." I thought it was marvelous, really lovely. That really, you get caught by terrible people. People say these things, when they come round to your dressing room. It's so disheartening, and they say, "Oh, you should have been in the audience," they say. Well, imagine how you feel. It's terrible.
Good was not the word.
That's it. Or the best one is, "Oh, you."
That brings to mind a story about Noel Coward's visit backstage to Vivien Leigh at Titus Andronicus. Why don't you tell us about it, Raj? You do it so well.
God, you are a good feed, I must say. No, this is not. I wasn't there, but she was doing Lavinia. I think the Titus Andronicus, the saddest, most poignant play in the whole of the canon. Playing it opposite Sir Lawrence, who was playing the title role. They were doing that with Twelfth Night. She was playing Viola, and he was playing Malvolio. And she was a big star from America, from Gone with the Wind and everything. But they were together again, and they often toured Britain, and they often toured America together, in classic plays. Lavinia, poor girl, saddest part in Shakespeare, is greatly abused by some men during the course of the play, and in order that she will tell no one of what they've done to her, they cut her tongue out and they cut her hands off. And that's right, yeah. And in this parlous state, this girl grabs a stick between her bleeding arms, and she scratches the names of the perpetrators in the sand. It's terribly moving as a scene. It's terrible. Noel Coward came to see one matinee, and sadly, on this occasion, Vivien Leigh as Lavinia picked up the stick between her bleeding arms. But as she started to scratch the name, the stick slipped away and fell off the stage. And Noel Coward came round to her dressing room afterwards, and he put his head around her dressing room door, and he said, "Butter stumps." He said, "Butter stumps."
And she went crazy. We'll jump ahead a little bit because you mentioned him, but a few years after this production of Titus Andronicus, you had the opportunity to make a film with Laurence Olivier.
Yeah, I did. He wasn't very well at that time, and a little forgetful. and I think I've done this before. I was in a TV play with Beatrix Lehman and Jane Lapater. We were the young people, Jane Lapater and myself, and Beatrix Lehman, who was a lover of Rupert Graves. She was always very forgetful. And then when we shot the thing, Rupert Brooke, I meant.
Yes, I was going to wait until you
Rupert
finished
Brooke.
to say Rupert Brooke.
She liked men called Rupert, and she forgot her lines every time we ran through the rehearsals. But when we filmed it, she was fantastic, and it so put us off that we weren't very good. But Laurence Olivier wasn't out to that. He just was towards the end of his life, and he was a little forgetful, but he was fantastic. I remember he did those Polaroid advertisements. I think, do you remember he was famous for only doing one advertisement in his life, and it was for Polaroid. And he didn't like the director of this film called The Ebony Tower. A lovely man. He was lovely. He just didn't get on with him particularly well. And I remember that one day at lunchtime, because the director was always ordering us around, telling us where to stand in front of the camera. And so at one lunchtime, Laurence Olivier took a Polaroid picture of the director. And the director went, "Oh, please don't take a picture." And Laurence Olivier said, "Oh, you can hand it out, but you can't take it." He said, which is kind of good. But it was wonderful. It was so thrilling to be near him. And if you could Netflix this movie called The Ebony Tower, written by John Mortimer for the film from the John Fowles novel. Great idea about a young impressionist painter meeting an old figurative painter. So it was interesting to me to do it, and Greta Scarci was in it. It was a wonderful experience for me to do this with him. He did a wonderful thing, knowing he was somewhat of a legend in his own lifetime. He went out of his way to have dinner each night with one of the cast or crew individually, just one-on-one. And I remember my night was 1983, October the 3rd. And that's when I went to his hotel and the restaurant next door, and he was at the end of the bar, and he was on the phone. And I went down the bar, and he put the phone down on the receiver and looked up. And his face was more than unusually ashen. And I said, "Are you okay?" And pinching myself that I was alone with Laurence Olivier and we were going to have a meal together. But he seemed sad, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he put his hand on my shoulder, I remember, and he said, he said 4 words, "Oh, Roger, Ralph's dead." And he just had news that Ralph Richardson had died. And Ralph Richardson and he were the greatest friends. They acted together in so many plays. And it was extraordinary and memorable, of course, and awful to be there that night. But we sat down, and then I started to ask him questions about filming Henry V in Ireland, and he suddenly took off on that and got excited again and things. But he was very, very sad at losing his friend. So, but it was terribly wonderful to be there with him. And if you look at the movie, he's spectacularly brilliant in the movie, and the rest of us are not as spectacularly brilliant. But it was lovely to do it. Yeah, it's great.
Of the directors that you worked with at the Royal Shakespeare Company, did you have a more profound relationship with one over the others, or do you have a particular acting technique thanks to the directorial hand that you experienced there?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I'm sort of. It's rarely that I put these things in words, really. I recently worked with Ian McKellen, and we were 5 months at the Haymarket Theatre doing Waiting for Godot, and we took it to Australia and New Zealand, and eventually we played it in Cape Town. And on Mondays, we performed it in the townships, just in our costumes under trees, to 800 children and adults who'd never ever seen a play that had been written before. And Ian McKellen, never ever talks about acting. He just won't do it, because it's, I think, hard to talk about. He doesn't like to describe it. But I think it's true that the Royal Shakespeare Company was a an education for me, and I think about the women I've acted with all my life, because guys get to act with women a lot. That's what most stories are about. Someone falls in love with someone, and I've acted with some of the greatest women in the world, but I've been directed by some of the finest directors. Trevor Nunn was particularly wonderful for me. I mean, he went on to do other things, as we all do. We all dreamed that we would only do classic plays forever and ever and ever, and of course the opportunities come along to do other things, and you realize that were Shakespeare alive today himself, he probably would be making movies somewhere. You can't be too grand about it. But Trevor seemed to get me very well, and I was his leading man for about 6 years in Comedy of Errors, all these different plays, and then finishing up with Nickleby. There was something about my middle classness, I didn't sound. I spoke in a rough way when I was younger, and I taught myself to sound a bit more like this, to be in plays, and I wish I hadn't really, because I think nowadays it's really good just to sound like you. When I teach American actors, I tell them just sound like you. Don't pretend to be British or anything like that. That's stupid. Shakespeare sounded more like you than he did like me.
What do you mean?
Well, Shakespeare, to be or not to be, sounds in Elizabethan English like to be or not to be. That is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Well, it sounds like an American, doesn't it? Sounds like a hillbilly, Doesn't sound like me.
Or a senator.
Yeah. It's Barney Frank.
You see what I'm up against here. But we'll...
So Trevor Nunn was really a great influence, but then also I was directed a lot by Terry Hands, and he got some great stuff out of me, really fantastic, challenging, very different. And John Barton was, I think, tremendous, because he was really in touch with Shakespeare. He just knew everything about the way the rhythms lean on themselves, the way he knew about everything about alliteration. He taught me all these things about alliteration, about repetition, about all this exquisite stuff about short line endings and long lines in Shakespeare. If there's ever a gap in a Shakespeare, Shakespeare's his own stage manager. If you see a short line with just 2 words and 8 beats of nothing, you understand Shakespeare's built on 10 beats in a bar. And now we take you back to CNN. That's a Shakespeare line. Da-da-da-do-do-do-da-da-do. And now we take you back to CNN. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Same thing. And if there's a short line of just 2 beats, then Shakespeare's telling you something happens in the 8 beats that follow. Someone does something. It's so interesting. So you can look at these plays like a map. And so, I was learning things like that from John Barton and from Terry Hands and from Trevor Nunn. It was wonderful. The person who directed my Hamlet was Ron Daniels, who previous to that directed me in a play by Nikolai Erdmann, written in Moscow in 1926, called The Suicide, which was a great play for me, and we started off in the other place and finished up at the Aldwych Theatre, playing in the big house. It was a great, funny play about the individual. A serious play, and Nikolai Erdmann was forbidden by Stalin's, they were called the RAP, his artistic police, to actually write anymore, because he wrote one more play called The Mandat, but he wrote some film scripts, but eventually died in 1953, I think. Just didn't write anything else because he was so scared. But he wrote this wonderful play called The Suicide, which we did, and Ron Daniels directed me in that and in Hamlet. And so I had a happy time with him. I was directed by other people there too. One of the first things I did was a workshop of King John, and it was directed by a lady called Buzz Goodbody, who was a very great, and she died way too early, but she was a great director too.
You've originated roles, Nicholas Nickleby, Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, Henry.
Yeah.
You've created new roles in new plays. You have played Hamlet, you've played Barone, you've played the great Shakespeare parts up to the age-appropriate parts that you are still looking forward to playing. Yeah. How would you you have a new role on a table and a great classic role on the table, and you have 5 minutes to make up your mind. How do you decide?
Well, it's fun, interesting. Somebody played these parts once, for the first time, first person, Burbage, some of them, and it's probably better to do the new play. It's better to help out, isn't it? Rather than just sit back and they say that whatever you do to a classic part, you'll always do one thing that no one ever thought of. It's wonderful. I stole a thing from Gielgud when, as Hamlet, when Claudius, it's called I think it's called the prayer scene, perhaps. There's an audacious thing that Shakespeare does. Claudius dismisses Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and prays in soliloquy for relief from this terrible thing he's done, killing his brother. And into that scene comes Hamlet. And Hamlet soliloquizes on top of Claudius's soliloquy. So it's two soliloquies in one place. It's an audacious piece of writing. And Gielgud in his production, well, he did it 5 times, Gielgud. And he directed it 5 times. He was in it a couple of times before that too. So he knew Hamlet. By the time he was directing himself in Hamlet, John Gielgud knew exactly what he wanted to do. The minute you finish these great parts, you go, oh, I wish I could do it again, because you now sort of know a bit more about it. But he in the last production of Hamlet that Gielgud did, he instructed his Claudius to take off his sword, put it down beside him, and then pray. And then when Gielgud came in as Hamlet, he took up Claudius's sword, because he needs a sword to kill Polonius in the next scene with his mother. He took up that sword and held it above Claudius's head and thought, shall I kill him? No, I can't kill him while he's praying, so I'll kill him another time. He left the scene with the sword, which meant that Claudius comes out of his praying, reaches down for his sword, and can't understand where it's gone. It's a great bit of business. It's fantastic. And so I stole that. I stole that from Gielgud. But they say that, so yes, it's wonderful to do these great parts. I'd love to play every Shakespeare part. I've got a copy of Shakespeare at home, and I've got highlighted every part I've ever played, and it's filling up quite nicely. But, I will probably never get to do them all. Although in my one-man show, I do play the nurse from Romeo and Juliet. And I'm damn good at that. But I think what I try to do now is to play. I keep saying to young playwrights, write me a play. Let me be in a new play by you. Come on. If it helps you for me to be in it, because it will certainly help me. It's a wonderful thing to be in a new play. To be the first person to play a part is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I'd say, given 5 minutes, that would be my answer. I'd take the new play. It's sad, isn't it? But
well, except for if you're the new playwright.
Oh, especially, yeah. Yeah.
You've been directed by Bob Fosse and Trevor Nunn. What did Bob Fosse teach you that Trevor Nunn couldn't have begun to know?
Oh well, I was directed by Bob Fosse in Star 80. I played Peter Bogdanovich. He wasn't allowed to be called that by the attorneys. He was called Aram Nichols. But I was directed by Bob Fosse, and we went. I filmed a lot of scenes in Pasadena, and shortly after doing that movie is when I came and met Trevor and met you at CAT. It was the most exciting thing, and I suppose what Bob Fosse has got inherently, always, he's got that thing that only great dancers, great musicians, great human beings have got. Trevor has it to some extent, of course, but more intellectually. But he has a kind of peasant rhythm. His rhythm is just always there. He knows when to stop the shot. Star 80 is edited by Bob Fosse. It's the best edited movie you'll ever see in your life. You hear the soundtrack. He started to do the soundtrack of the scene that's coming up in the middle of the scene that you're watching. He started to overlap that stuff. He was his rhythm on the set all day long, and I just regret that I was too uptight not to go to lunch with him more, or he'd say, come and have a drink with us tonight, and I'd say, no, you don't want me around. Yeah. And I wouldn't do it because I didn't want to blow it, because I loved being near him. He was extraordinary to be near. Trevor, of course, was such he built me up, really, and gave me the opportunity to understand how great someone like Bob Fosse was. And what a great mind. And in each of the disciplines that he applied himself to, what a master. And to be near someone like that is just thrilling. It's I was very flattered once when Nancy Walker, who I knew when I lived in Los Angeles, said to me, I like you when you come on stage because you move the molecules. Well, I don't know what that meant, but I think she means like the air gets out of your way when you come on stage. And I was so flattered. I remembered it. But Bob Fosse does that. Bob Fosse moves the molecules. He's just like a creature. There's great stage creatures, great stage animals, and he was one of them. He was one of those great animals who just needed to be heard. Yeah.
He gave you a good short acting class for on-camera work, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. How is it you know so much about me? See, any other moderator by now would be asking that question. Which do you prefer, stage or cinema?
We're getting to that.
These are good questions. So it wasn't only to me, but Bob Fosse would direct like this. The lens of the camera is here. I saw him do it to Carol Baker. So I knew it wasn't just to me. His head is here, and he's smoking a cigarette. He's always smoking a cigarette. And say my lines were, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. All right. Action. Mary had a little lamb. There's a pause now. And in that pause, Bob Fosse would say, don't act, Roger. Roger, don't act. Its fleece was white as snow. Don't act, Roger. Don't act. And everywhere that Mary went, no acting, Roger, no acting. The lamb was sure to go. That was his technique because he could cut himself out, but it was spectacular. He would talk to you all the way through it. Fantastic. It was much better than working with Mel Brooks, because Mel Brooks would say, action, and you do a scene with Richard Lewis or something like that in Robin Hood Men in Tights, and then he'd say, cut, and then he'd say, surprisingly good. I love Mel Brooks. That was such a thrill. Making Mel Brooks laugh. I said to him, if I could die and go to heaven now, I made you laugh. It's fantastic.
And what would Mel Brooks know as a director that Peter Brook would have objected to?
Wow. Well, they both knew Brooke Shields, right?
No, you're the common link there.
They're both anarchists, but I do know that Peter Brook had a private income from the age of 16. So that meant that he could have that theater in France and things like that. Because all of us, artists, we just need a bit of money, and we could change the world, really. In that wonderful play, Rick will now tell you the line, because it's a line that means a lot to him as a playwright. But there's a line from The Real Thing, written by Tom Stoppard. Tell us that line.
Well, this is spoken by Henry, this part that Roger created back in '83. He's a writer, a playwright, the character, and he's being written by Tom Stoppard. And the line is, if you can get the right words in the right order, you can nudge the world a little, or write a poem that children will say for you after you're gone. And that's the whole line, but the first half of it has, a dear friend of ours has actually embroidered it onto a cushion that is on the chair that I lean against every day, because it's just the greatest little mantra to have, no matter what you do in your life, as long as some of it is based on communicating. And back to you.
Yeah, no, but I think Mel Brooks or Peter Brook, I suppose, Mel Brooks is very serious, and Peter Brook is very silly. Really. I don't know what the difference is really. Peter Brook would do a play and then take it out to the Sahara Desert and show it to the Tuareg or the Arabs and things, and see what they would make of it and things like that. Extraordinary ideas. But Mel Brooks is just a vaudevillian, isn't he? He's just a fantastic, strong-minded, funny man. And I knew him, luckily enough, when Anne Bancroft, his wife, was around, and they were so nice to me and wonderful. I've spent a wonderful couple of days with Peter Brook in Paris on an earlier occasion, and he was very nice to me, but it was an entirely different experience. But Mel Brooks, it was just challenging and delightful and thrilling, and I'm sort of a vaudevillian at heart, really. I'm trapped in a leading man's body, but I'm really a 3-foot-high vaudevillian, and so I like Mel Brooks a lot. Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about theater. We've talked a little bit tiny bit about film. Now that SAG and AFTRA are one union, let's talk a little bit about television. You were in Los Angeles in 1989 with another Tom Stoppard play that you originated a part in. The play is Hapgood, and the name of the role, Kerner. And Roger played it with Felicity Kendall and Nigel Hawthorne on the West End, and then came with the play in the Peter Wood production and played with Judy Davis and Simon Jones? Simon Jones. Yeah. At the Huntington Hartford, or the Doolittle Theater, as it was, I think, called when you were actually there, in '89. And whilst there, as you would say, you auditioned for Cheers.
Yeah. Can I just say that that's the other director who had the great influence on me, and that's Peter Wood, who directed The Real Thing and Hapgood. He directed Olivier in many plays.
And directed, he was sort of, for many years, was Tom Stoppard's go-to guy also.
Yeah. He just the greatest. He's, in truth, the best director for me ever, because he could get under my skin. When he'd give me directions, I'd have to squeeze this fingernail into my thumb so I wouldn't cry, because he was really strong with me.
He's the only director that directed you on stage and also directed you in a film, isn't that true?
Yeah, we went to Germany. He was directing a film in German, and I played this leading part with Louis Malle's first wife, and I spoke in English, and they all spoke in German. I had to learn the end of the German lines because and then they dubbed me. They dubbed me afterwards, but it was in a place called Gottlieben, which is where Switzerland and Austria and Germany meet. And it was in a Schloss. It was very romantic. And Peter is a great film director, wonderful. And it was a happy time. It was, but Peter Wood was great for me. Just he would be rude to you in the way that you really, frank, loving, demanding. That thing I like. He was the best, I think, in that way. He wouldn't hold anything back. Which you need, really. You've got to get it better, I think. That's not exactly what your question was. Cheers, yeah. I was playing this Russian particle physicist with a sort of Russian accent, but he only spoke in physics. One of the funniest parts I've ever had. Big speeches. What's that thing about a moth in a cathedral? That was fantastic, wasn't it?
The Heisenberg theory.
Oh yeah. They're full of kind of extraordinary physics. It's a magnificent play, but really a love story. Very confounding play, but just a love story, simple love story underneath everything. And the people from Cheers came and saw the play, and I got an invitation to go and meet with them because they were looking to introduce a new character. So I put my suit on, and my tie, and it was like the hottest day I've ever experienced in my life. And I drove myself to Paramount Studios, and they gave me a pass, and I parked the car, and the tarmac was melting under my feet as I walked, and I couldn't get a drink anywhere, and I was sweating, and but anyway, I wanted to put on a good show and try to get this part. And they said, "Oh, they're all in the writers' room. Go in there." And I knocked on the door, and they said, "Come in." And I opened the door, and there were 25 people there wearing like Speedos. They were all like in their beach gear. It was incredible. Yeah. So they must have thought I was perfect for the part because, here I was in a suit on the hottest day of the year. But anyway, they'd seen me in the play, and they had this new part called Robin Colcord, which they thought I would be good at. And I met with them. They said, you enjoy Cheers, of course. And all I knew really was that there was a dark brown program on late at night, but I'd never really seen it. But I said, it is one of my favorite shows. And I think I didn't have to read anything. I just got the job. It was spectacular. Once again, it's great actors. Fantastic actors. The American actors are the best actors in the world, in that way, in that kind of absolutely truthful way. It's wonderful. The British actors are word-based, and the American actors are absolutely, think about the psychology first and then the words later, find a way to express themselves. But these people sort of sat in the middle of it, and they were funny, they were real, they were great human beings. I think in the end, Shakespeare just wants a human being. And I think that's what you got with Cheers. That's why people relate to it. That's why people loved it so much. It was the place where we could all go and where nobody knew your name, but they just, they recognized you.
That's very good, Rod. And Jimmy Burrows was
Jimmy Burrows, the other great director, fantastic director. Abe Burrows' son. Jimmy had been around when Guys and Dolls and all these other things that Abe Burrows did, thousands of productions on Broadway. And Jimmy was always around and stage managing, helping his dad and things. So he got this once again, this rhythm thing. You're either funny or you're not, really. You've either got rhythm or you haven't. And Jimmy Burrows has it, shooting with 4 cameras. This was the rhythm of a week on Cheers. On Tuesday, we would spend an hour reading the new script. You weren't shown it beforehand. It was face down on a conference table. The writers were around the edge of the room, many of them, and the actors came in, sat at the table, turned the script over and read it. You read it, and it takes 22 minutes. And if you didn't get a laugh on the lines that were funny, that wouldn't be in the script the next day.
Or sometimes the actor wouldn't be in the show the next day.
No, it's true. I remember people collapsing, and they would be replaced immediately because you've got to be tough in comedy. It's tragedy is easy, but comedy is really tough, and that's what we used to call it, the Kirstie Alley cold reading class. Yeah, but it was really tough. So then we worked for about an hour and a half on Wednesday. Thursday, we'd come and do a little blocking of everything, which would take about 2.5 hours. Friday, similarly. Then we'd have Saturday and Sunday off. And Monday, we'd do a camera rehearsal in the afternoon. And then we'd work all day Tuesday. And the Tuesday night, an audience would come in. Now, every day, all through that, it sounds like we weren't working very much, but actually, we were getting rewrites all the time. Rewrites. Everything gets rewritten.
You mean the writers were working too?
Yeah, they were. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. And it was a very grand thing because they would have lunches sent in, and there'd be a masseuse doing your shoulders when you're reading the words. I think it was good. But on the Tuesday, you really had to work, and that's when these people, George Wendt, Woody Harrelson, the great the Ted Danson, who made it look so easy. People say, well, Ted Danson doesn't do anything. He's just like a guy. That's the hardest thing to do. The acme of all those performances, of course, is someone like, for me, someone like Paul Newman in a movie, when on a 50-foot screen you see his face, and rather like my mother when she went to the Tate Gallery and she saw a sketch by Picasso, she said, well, I could do that, she said. Well, of course, she couldn't, and nor could I do what Paul Newman does, which is seemingly to be doing nothing, but in fact to be doing everything. Restraint is the great thing in acting, and Ted Danson knew exactly what to do to make that man believable, funny, sweet, clumsy. It was a great lesson to be near Ted Danson. I thought he was spectacular in that show, and Kirstie Alley too, one of the great people I've acted with. Such a funny woman, fantastic. So I had a great time on that show until after about 3 years I was a semi-regular, and then the character just wore itself out, and so they moved. I was there to to spice it up a bit, and after about 3 years, the character wore itself out. And I said to Jimmy Burrows, I said, "Yeah, you mean that's it?" He said, "Well, you're just a device." He said. It's good. It's good. You know, acting is also a very volatile experience through your life. You're loved, you're hated, you're loved, you're hated. You know, it's not just one ascent into heaven. And I learned a lesson there. It was a great one. You know, that Jimmy said, "Yeah, just in it for now, and then someone else will be in it." And it's like these plays, just the great classic plays. Someone played Richard II, and someone else will play it, and someone else will play it. We pass these things on. It's a lovely thing, that. Someone said that it's only about 10 handshakes and you can get right back to Shakespeare. You know, if you shook hands with your grandmother and she shook hands with somebody else and somebody else across the centuries, you can actually get back, it's about 10 handshakes back to Shakespeare. It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
I think it's also interesting something that you touched on, which is that Jimmy Burrows and Abe Burrows, actually, you know, Marshall Brickman used to type jokes for Abe Burrows over here on the Upper West Side when he was starting out in television, and I got to work with Marshall on a bunch of stuff. And
you wrote Jersey Boys together.
I think they've already heard that, but you know, Marshall's one of the great writers and has been for many more years than I've been alive. And but this theater connection is what I find moving, because I'm a theater guy, and I dare say that you are too. And I probably, if you're here, then that's probably true of everyone in this room. That theater is sort of the beginning point and the end point in terms of the really crafty creative act, and that Jimmy Burrows, coming from the theater, was able to bring some of that, at least to a 4-camera environment, which is performing in front of a live audience. Yes, you get to retake, but you're still playing entire scenes, not doing one line here and then camera comes around and coverage and all of that. Then a few years after that, you met up with another theater guy, Aaron Sorkin, and he said to you, well, just shorthanded, Roger auditioned for the pilot to play the chief of staff, and it was down to 2 guys, Roger and Johnny Spencer, who got the part. And at the screen test, I guess, Aaron Sorkin says to Roger, because I thought we'd go to the historical present. He says to Roger, I'm going to write you a part. And 4 years later, he did. And I think not only, obviously, Aaron Sorkin's a genius and a great writer, great listener, which is how you become a great writer, I think. And but he's also a decent human being who said, I'm going to do this for you, and followed through, came through, and wrote you a very, very nice role, which we won't talk about. But the reason I bring it up is because I want to bring it back around. I like the idea of completing circles and all of that closure stuff. And when you were on set for West Wing, he came to you and asked you about a specific piece of music.
Oh yeah, he remembered that Nicholas Nickleby, the first act closed with a wonderful piece of music, a sort of patriotic, jingoistic, seemingly sort of cheap piece of music, which eventually became anthemic, and was extraordinary when the whole company gradually moved on stage, and all these characters from all the different strata of the English society suddenly were there singing about their hopes for a country, you know, after the Industrial Revolution, after what's going to happen, where are we going to go from here. It's an extraordinary piece of music by the wonderful Stephen Oliver, who you can get this music, and it's Stephen Oliver's music is extraordinary, and it was such a privilege that he wrote the music for Nicholas Nickleby. But Aaron Sorkin remembered that, and he said, "What is that piece of music?" And I was able to direct him to it, and then he used it in a future episode The West Wing, which was extraordinary because it meant so much to him too. He recognized its kind of the great trick of that piece of music used in the theatre in that way. It grew out of a rather bad production of a bastardized production of Romeo and Juliet done by a rather impoverished theatre company. And then out of that grew this very well-intentioned and hopeful and inspiring and motivational piece of music, which closed the first act of Nicholas Nickleby.
And a song of profound and entirely uncynical patriotism, in this case towards Britannia, but it was the sound of it and the impact of it was so profound that many years later, when we were working on Peter and the Starcatcher, I said, I want to have a moment at the end of the first act that tries to achieve the same wonderful trick where the audience is expecting this sort of solution to every problem that the play presents, and suddenly something comes in that's very, very big and grand and emotional and true that will sort of blow the audience's hair back. And the reason I bring that up is because now I want to segue to talking a little bit about your career as a director.
Okay.
Roger ran the Bristol Old Vic for 3 seasons in the late 80s and ran the Williamstown Theater Festival for 3 seasons in the early part of this century. And which is lucky that you didn't do it in the early part of the last century, because
Yeah, I'd be tired.
What urge in you made you decide that you wanted to direct, and then what desire supplanted that? Because there's only so much directing you can actually do, directing of plays, when you're directing entire companies of actors and administrators and designers and
running theatres is a very different thing from being an independent director, but you do get the opportunity, and you can make the opportunity for yourself to actually direct some things in your seasons. But I was once really badly misquoted by saying, rather mistakenly, that I quite like being the daddy. I said, I quite like being the daddy. I quite like looking after people, really. I feel kind of responsible. Victor Garber once said a sweet thing to me. He said, "Who else would play Nicholas Nickleby? You're so responsible," he said. I said, "Oh, really? I didn't think of that." But I feel I quite like to help. And certainly when at the Bristol Old Vic, we made many good changes while I was there, and profitably so for them. And I think at Williamstown too, we did things which enhanced the value of the next generation. They weren't just there to work; they were there to be educated and actually make work for themselves and actually create product, which I think is a very, very important thing for this next generation. I was, as you've heard, mentored by lots of wonderful people, and I just feel that very strongly within myself. And I think anybody who loves the arts, like anybody who buys, if you and your wife are going to the theatre, I urge you to buy 3 tickets and take a young theatre practitioner with you and explain to them why you like the theatre, and hope to, so they, you pay the money and they see a play they couldn't afford to see. You take them for a meal, which they obviously sorely need, and and it just enhances their appreciation of the arts, and perhaps they'll do that to the next generation. I think we have to look to that. It's a very important thing, passing it on, just in the way these characters and performances are passed on. But the directing is that it seems to be the same sort of fountainhead as acting or drawing or anything. It's just an artistic expression, and I like being able to step back from a play. It's we're sitting here tonight and we know that Peter and the Starcatcher is playing as we speak. It's a kind of a wonderful feeling to know that people are watching your work, even though but that's no different than being a painter when people go to a gallery, or being a poet when people read your poem. The hardest thing of all the tasks in these artistic ventures is to actually be the actor, I think, because there you are the violin, you are the poem. It's you they're talking about when they don't like your performance. you know. So that's a little harder, but you can remove yourself as a director, you can let the play happen. And then eventually actors want to take the play over, and the designers, you know, have ideas that they want to run with and things like that. So it's really encouraging, and I think I call directing negotiating the middle. It's rather like having, shall we say, 10 marbles on the back of a book, and you're trying to balance them all keep them all on the back of the book, and none of them fall off. It feels like that to me, and I'm rather good at that. Yeah.
Did you? It was another impulse that you felt that you had been done badly by as an actor, and so you decided to change the equation a bit by being the person who makes more decisions. Was that ever a factor for you?
No, although actors are, I mean, that's a fantastic.
She's just had an offer.
Yeah.
Hold out for scale.
Yeah. That's incredible. I'm going to use that one day. That's fantastic. It's
Why
rare
would you sit
and
right
rare.
in the front if you had to leave early? I don't understand.
Yeah. No. I don't know. Well, what's the question?
You've we'll go on to another one. You've directed yourself
I have.
in plays.
Yeah. And I gave myself a very bad
You're
time.
talking to a room full of SAG members. You know,
Yeah.
talk to us like SAG members. You're directing other actors. You're directing a group of actors. It's one thing. You're directing a group of actors, including yourself. It's something else, or it's the same thing?
We did Taming of the Shrew up in Williamstown, which you only rehearsed for 3 weeks. And B.B. Newith played Catherine, and she was fantastic. Really, really wonderful. And Tom Bloom was in it, David Aaron Baker, John Connolly. All my friends were in it, really. And I depended upon them to direct me as Petruchio. And I directed it at the same time. But it was a very funny, sweet production, and we had such fun. I was exhausted, but I loved doing it. It was great to do two things at once. It's very important. It's very Elizabethan to do two things at once. George Bush's world, that's where you do one thing at a time, just one thing. But like the Elizabethans, one word, one sound to the Elizabethan mind meant 50 things. You know, people were much, when Romeo dies, he says, "Thus with a kiss I die." To die to the Elizabethan ear meant to expire, but it also meant to achieve sexual climax. It meant two things at once. It was exquisite. Language to them was exquisite. And what's happening nowadays, things get a little kind of plainer, more blunt, more ordinary, and I urge you all, you SAG members, to fight against that, and join me in the cause, because it's good for things to mean more than one thing, I think, and it was a great production, really, because of my friends, and I think you trust your friends. It happens there's a moment in Peter and the Starcatcher, which Rick enjoys very much, where just such trust is exampled, isn't it? When the boy Peter, who actually flies on Peter Pan, flies on Broadway in Peter and the Starcatcher with no wire, no artificial assistance whatsoever. He actually leaps in the air. And how does he do that, Rick? I'll answer. Yeah.
There's a ladder that's used throughout the evening in many different contexts, and in this particular context, he's falling. The boy is running up a mountain, being pursued, but he's thinking about a girl, and so he misjudges a step, and he falls into a chasm, and goes plummeting down until he lands splash in a grotto full of water. Now, how do you do that on stage? You can describe it, but the theater, these people are always telling you gotta show, you don't tell, show, don't tell. Well, how do you show somebody? How do you show like a living person, and it's not a movie, and there's no crash pad? And I mean, how do you show somebody falling down a mile, bouncing, ripping his body apart, getting scraped by rocks and banging his head and finally splashing into a pool of water? Well, the directors came up with this a very cunning solution, and the solution was he won't fall down at all. He will climb up to the top of this ladder, while the other actors, there's 12 actors in the play. The one actor who plays the boy is climbing to the top of the ladder, while several of the other actors are spinning the ladder, sort of in a vortexy kind of shape. The lights are helping with that image, so you get the idea of somebody sort of being out of control physically. And the other men are subtly taking a fireman's net with a swatch of gold lame that's been attached to the top of it, and opening up the net and standing in very, very precise positions that they've all carefully rehearsed. And when the kid gets to the top of the ladder, which has a platform on it, he stands there and he announces that he goes falling into a pool of golden water, at which point he jumps off the ladder, and for a moment you see a human body in flight, no tricks. And then he's caught in the fireman's net. It sounds really simple. Unless you're the kid in rehearsal and you see this height of the ladder and he goes, well, I'm not going up that ladder. What if they don't catch me? And so you try it one step and then 2 steps a week later and 3 steps finally, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps. He goes up 8 steps and he's up quite high. And the other actors have practiced with a bag of potatoes, and then they've practiced with 5 bags of potatoes, and they're sort of weighing the potatoes against the kid, and what's heavier, and getting an idea of what it's going to be like, and how close the thing comes when the object hits, and how far above the ground you need to hold it so he doesn't hit the ground anyway, and finally comes the day when he trusts enough to actually jump. So you have the flying only because you have the trusting. And why Roger and Alex Timbers, his directing partner in this play, are so great is that in that moment the play and the production of the play become one thing, which is a demonstration of the concept that life is better when we're part of something bigger than ourselves. Because the kid couldn't possibly jump he certainly would never do it a second time if they weren't there to catch him. And because they're there, he's able to do it, and because he's able to do it, the audience sees, for the first time in a play about Peter Pan, a human body in flight.
And so when I played Petruchio, I trusted my other actors to see me right, and they did. And it's a great feeling to give yourself to everyone else in that way. I think it's a great thing, and the corporate nature of theatre is really what I'm interested in, and it's the times I've had the happiest and sometimes the fiercest, but also the most successful times in the theatre, working as a group of people with one object in mind. Trevor Nunn used to say, as the director, we should just think of him as the person with the last say-so. So imagine we've crashed a plane in the middle of the desert and someone says, let's go down this wadi over here looking for water. And so we'll follow in that direction. But if we go too far in that direction, Trevor Nunn, or the director, is the person who will say, nope, we must go back to the crash site and take another direction. And then we'll go anyway. And so Peter and the Starcatcher was really built from the best idea in the room every time. No one, sometimes the weakest person in a company is your strongest link. It's not all about flash and glibness. It's about the common strength of telling a story, I think, which is interests me a lot. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people ask you what it was like to direct a play with another director. But I've never heard anybody connect the dots, so I'm going to ask you. Is part of the reason why you and Alex were able to take on this assignment as co-directors because of the experience you'd had with Nickleby being directed by Trevor and John Caird, that you had seen a directorial collaboration firsthand and you knew what that could be, or was it irrelevant to your decision?
No, I think at the back of my mind that was true. John Caird, to Trevor Nunn, brilliant director in his own right, but he was the logistician. He was the man who could work it out. And Trevor had these kind of extraordinary artistic ideas about the way it would move through. It was also assembled by the actors, the 43 actors in the play, Nicholas Nickleby. You know, we all came from different disciplines. I came, as I described, from accumulated word base, and other people like David Threlfall, who played so brilliantly the part of Smike, came from factory theatre, you know, very fierce, very aggressive political theatre. So there was a lot of learning from each other, and as we built that play together, all of us, there were people who left, people who died, people who got married, people who will never speak to anyone else again, you know, and other people who joined us. So it was a continual...
You didn't know what part you were going to play, did you?
No, I didn't. I until that point, I was a juvenile character actor. I thought I would play Mr. Mantalini, was the part I had my eye on. And there was lots of younger people. I was 36 when I did Nicholas Nickleby, and lots of younger men in the company, 21-year-olds, who looked just like the drawings in the Dickens books, drawings which actually, in truth, Dickens didn't completely approve of, but they looked much more like Nicholas Nickleby than I did. And people were very commiserate with David Threlfall, because he played Smike, and he had to play it like this. All evening he walked about like this. Like that. But no one cared a fig about me. I had to stand like this all evening, pretending to be very young. It was incredible. Hello, yes. That's much harder to do.
You had the fist up too, didn't you?
I had a fist up as well. Yeah, so, you know, I could never answer the phone or anything. It was horrible. But yeah, so it was and Nicholas Nickleby did influence me, seeing these two directors working together. I've been directed by directors and with very strong-minded assistant directors, and that can, you know, they don't say very much, but their facial expressions will tell you a lot. So here's the director, and there's the assistant director, and they're giving notes to the company, and the director will say, "Well, Roger, you were very bad in that speech, I thought." And then the assistant director over here will go. And then the director will say, "And I don't think you can do it like that again." And the assistant director will go. I wanted to poke his eyes out. I can.
And then the play opens, and it's only the assistant director who's left.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, so, and Alex is irritatingly enough half my age, but he's a great theatre mind. He's a wonderful, bright, clever, resourceful, aggressive man in the theatre, which is what you want. You don't want it. It, as we've described, perhaps, started to move towards an idea that you don't want it to be a museum. We want it to change, and just when you think perfection in the theatre has to be a moving point. The minute you go, "I've got it," that stiff, rock-hard thing is no good. You've got to go, "I've got it, and I'm going to move on." You've got to move past it. You've got to get better and keep getting better. It's no good if you think, "Oh, I've got it." Like, you know, some people say to me, they say, "Oh, I'm 40 now, and I'm retiring next year. I'm going to retire, and what are you going to do?" Well, I'm going to play golf, and, you know, see the children more. And I think, that's it? You've finished? You know, the idea of being finished is nothing. You can't, in the arts, we can't say that, can we? I mean, got to keep trying to get better, haven't we? Yes, we think that. Yeah. Come back. You're allowed to come back now.
Welcome back. So
we
it was a
heard everything you
role. Roger, I think you've demonstrated that philosophy. I'll tell you, folks. Roger knows the Latin name of almost any plant. Roger can be driving along the road, upstate New York, and says, "Oh, see that over there? That's purple loosestrife. That was brought here by a German Hausfrau in 1873, and now it's taken over the countryside." Or so I know expressions like ivy-leaved toad flax, and I know that Heather is also named Erica, and I know that digitalis isn't a pill, it's the foxglove plant. And all kinds of things, only because Roger has enlightened me, but he actually knows these things. Roger is a carpenter. If you need a chair, Roger knows how to build one. If you need a table, Roger can do that too, and it won't fall apart when you put a book on top of it. These are skills that ordinarily you don't associate with actors. But these skills, this sort of extra knowledge, what we call in this country the liberal arts part of your brain, that's valuable to you as an artist.
Well, you read Shakespeare, and he knew everything about plants, and rough hew them as we may. What's that line in Hamlet? Rough hew them as we.
Rough hew them as we may. Talking about the country hedgerows.
Yeah, Trevor heard two men saying, "Oh, you rough hew them." Trevor heard someone in Warwickshire, which is where Stratford-upon-Avon is, use the word rough hew, which is exactly the same as the expression in Hamlet, and it meant cutting off the end of the hedgerow. We're all contact. We're all back into the earth. It's all that contact into plant life and things like that. That perfection is a moving point is, of course, just the same as there's no such thing as a still photograph. No matter how fast your lens is, my molecules are going to be moving. I'm going to be changing. And it's just the same as a piece of fruit getting ripe. When is it not ripe? When is it ripe? And when is it overripe? When is the plant too big? When does the plant start to die? It's just that moment, that cresting, that beautiful blooming moment is what we look for. And then something else takes its place. And I think that's what we're seeking, really. And so, natural things feed the ideas, I think. I think that's a good thing. I like to equate, because I know about carpentry, because my father was a carpenter. He was a policeman, but he was really good at, extraordinarily great at woodwork and things. So I imitated that in him. He instigated this idea in me that a carpenter can take a tree and make a cabinet, and an actor can take these words on the page and make a human being. And it seems a similar journey, seems a similar thing.
Do you apply that to, I want to talk briefly about auditioning. Since you've auditioned, and now as a director, you are on the other side of the table and you watch people come in and audition. Yeah. And I know that Nancy Walker's husband was a great, David Craig, a great audition teacher that you spent some time with. And so we're all interested in what that process is, both for you as an actor, how do you succeed, what happens when you fail, not that you ever do. And as a director, what is the thing that excites you when the door opens, and what is the thing that you secretly roll your eyes over or sigh about when an actor leaves?
Wow. Well, the audition process is essential. We have to be seen. I tell other people, they say, I'm going for an audition, and I say, all you're doing today is you're going down to Ripley Greer, and you're really just going down there to pick the part up. The part's already yours. You're just going to collect it. I say that to them, and they go, "Oh yes, I see. That's good." But I can't do that myself. I can't get myself to that place yet. I'm working on it. The thing I know is that you have to put the work in. I sing much better now than I used to. But when I used to sing for auditions, I would stay up all night and I would sing the song like 60 times. 60 times. So at least it was in my body when I came to do it. The thought that you can go into an audition and just wing it is just nonsense. You've got to really know what you're going to do. Celia Keenan-Bolger is a very good example of the only girl in our show. Wonderful, wonderful actress. But she was asked by a young girl the other day at a talk back. She said, the young girl inquired, do you get nervous? And Celia said, I don't get nervous. I know what I'm going to do. I do it. And then I leave the theatre, and then I'm just myself. Which is and I thought, wow, God, that's good. I wish I could be like that, because there's nothing to get nervous about. And I like the phrase, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. If all you're frightened about is the act of being frightened, then just don't be frightened. Learn the part, learn the sides. Don't carry the paper with you. Just stay up all night and learn it and go in there and act really, really well that day. If you act really, really well that day, as the best you could, and leave, and David Craig taught me this wonderful thing, which is not to be subservient to the people who are adjudicating, but not to go, oh, hello, I'm terribly sorry, I missed the bus, I'm so exhausted, are you okay? Everything, all that's nonsense. Don't do all that. Just come in, say, are you ready? Do it and leave. It's fantastic if you can do that. Just hold your own counsel. Act the best you've ever acted, and then leave. And if they don't like you, it's to do with them. It's not to do with you. They may say, oh, we wanted a taller one, or we wanted a blonde one. Well, they're, trivial. If you do what you think you should do, and you do it well, then that's another day when you acted well. That seems to be the only thing. Are there things that annoy me? Some actors, when, as a director, you audition people. I've had this happen twice it's happened now. Is somebody comes in with their bag, and they put their bag down, and they do their audition, and they say, thank you very much, thank you. And I always say, as they're leaving the room, I always say, great, that was really good. I let them hear me saying that as though I'm saying it to my compatriots, but really I'm saying it so they feel it was a good thing they did. Good or bad, I always say that. And then the door closes, and then we talk about that actor. And twice, there's been a knock on the door after about 5 minutes, and they say, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I left my bag here, with their recording device in it. Yeah, twice that's happened. Isn't that good? This is crafty, isn't it? They wanted to hear what you said about them.
Yes, we figured that part out.
Yeah. I made that clear, right?
Yes,
yeah.
I think that was very, very clear. Now, what about you and what you've done that you haven't shared with us tonight gives you the idea that you could do a one-man show and actually hold the stage? What made you decide? Because you're clearly a modest man and you're self-effacing to a fault. And what possessed you to carve out this time in your life to assemble an hour and a half of just you?
Beth Emelson, who runs the Folger Theatre, the theatre department there, she said, I was going to do an evening I have, which is called Roger Rees Acts Up. I'm an anthologist. I make anthologies for, when Michael Williams, Judi Dench's husband, was alive, the three of us would, on Sundays, when our days off from Stratford, we'd go to stately homes and do performances of, we'd take a guy playing the lute or a pianist or something, and we'd do poetry and songs and bits of Shakespeare and things like that. These evenings are very common in England, and I work with a lot of people. I have an evening. Virginia McKenna played Gertrude, the wonderful, great English actress Virginia McKenna, played Gertrude in Hamlet, and she and I have a program called Sons and Mothers, where we play our Cardinal, and we do a little of Hamlet, and we do Brendan Bayon's mother. We do all the mothers and the son relationships through history, sort of thing, and they're sweet ideas. And I was going to do this modern poetry evening for Beth Emelson, and she said, is the Folger? She phoned me back one day, and she said it should be all Shakespeare. And I said, oh, don't be stupid. That's so. But then I started to think about it, and John Gielgud, Ian McKellen, Michael Pennington, all these people, Derek Jacobi, they all have one-man shows and things, and I have a one-man show now called What You Will, which I've done all over the country here. I've done at Stratford-upon-Avon. I'm just going to do it in the West End. And it's a collection of great soliloquies, many, many very funny theatre anecdotes and stories, and lots of stuff that I got from the internet where the kids have said about how much they hate Shakespeare and things like that. And intertwined in this evening is a lot about, I found out more and more as I did it more and more, that people just wanted to know about me. They wanted to know about how somebody as stupid and illiterate as that South London boy could finish up being somewhat verbose and garrulous and able to play parts like Hamlet and Barone and people who just talk all the time. I play egotistical people in the theatre, and I'm the most anonymous and shy person I've ever met. So it's an interesting game, and so I sort of talk about that. I also bring it home by talking about my father, who was, as I described, a very gifted man, but he was a policeman, and he was always off fighting crime and was never really home, and he was an alcoholic, and so it was a very difficult time growing up, and he died way too early for me to ever have a proper conversation with him, which seemed to me exactly concurrent with the ideas I was having when I was building my performance as Hamlet. And Hamlet never talked to his father, and I would contend that the longest conversation that Hamlet has with his father is the one in the play when they talk to each other on the battlements. And that maybe he was a martial man, always off fighting wars, and that Hamlet, as a young man, spent his time with Gertrude and Claudius going to plays before he himself went off to university. So I talk about my father a lot, and how he never really saw me act, and yet I found in his possessions when he died a little book of Shakespeare, which he was given as a prize at school. And so all those things kind of lock back into place, And so that's what the one-man show's about. And people seem to like it quite a lot. So I'll keep on doing it. Yeah. I bet we've got to take questions now. Is that what that means?
Let's go to some questions from the audience. Although I've tried to, having skimmed them beforehand, I've tried to
they looked
fold
skimmed.
some of them in. But let me see. Many of you used very, very light pencils. And I'm very, very blind. I will do my best. I'm going to play the trombone for you now. What advice do you have for artists who are aspiring, what advice do you have for artists who are aspiring to get their work seen and heard in an era where actors are now expected to pay to audition for casting directors, agents, etc.?
Just reinvent the whole thing. Do plays on a street corner, sing songs in pubs, take photographs of yourselves, make small films. Cameras now, you can get a really great camera for $3,000. Like studio quality camera. You can make your own poetry. Be your own poet. Don't buy into that thing about pay you money to audition for you. You must be crap. You must be horrible. I'll do my own play. Thank you very much. You've just got to be strong about yourself. That thing about believing in yourself. Who else is going to believe in you if you're dependent on them and they want you to pay money to audition? No. Just say, thank you very much, I'll let you know.
We have a friend named Kate Weatherhead, who is an actress, and she and her friend, who's Celia's brother, Andrew Keenan-Bolger, I think in a similar state of mind to this studio apartment, said, "Why don't we do our own?" And they created a web series comprised of many webisodes. There are lots of these on TV. There are websites. I'm sure we all go to Funny or Die and sites like that. They created a show, they paid for it themselves, and they did it really as an outlet for their writing and for their acting, and to give their friends who also were at liberty the chance to participate, and then also to bring in their celebrity friends who were busy to come in and sort of star it up so that people would tune in. And they did one season and it sort of got a little following, and then they got a great big amount of money, and they did a second season and they tripled their hits. And And
This is submissions only, right? Yeah,
This
you
is-
were in a
it's-
couple of episodes.
well,
Actually.
but
He's great,
it's called submissions only. But what's interesting is it resulted not only in all of the casting directors knowing who they are, but they are now writing. They have a book deal. They're writing a book. Which is going to take the form of an epistolary novel that they're writing back and forth. It's fiction. Yeah. So now they're going to be YA authors. That's young adult authors. It's like an amazing opportunity, totally out of left field. Next question. Hi, Roger. Somebody writes.
Hello.
Oh, no. This one we've totally dealt with.
Oh, sorry.
Apologies. Here's another number 0 pencil. How much of the movement of Peter and the Starcatcher was originally envisioned rather than worked out, decided as needed during rehearsal?
Oh, everything is completely organic. We have Alex and I spent time with 7 apprentices in a Masonic lodge up at Williamstown, with some sticks, some rope, a stuffed seagull, and some buckets, and we spent a week trying to work out some of the physicality, and much of that is still in the show. So it all grew from that. It all grew from those early days of just running about with ropes and buckets and things like that, and gradually expanded, and Kelly Devine came in and did some choreography, and then Stephen Hoggett, the great muscular choreographer, joined us and really put his touch onto it. But it really came out of everybody's, the actors, most of the actors in Peter and the Starcatcher, they're writers, singers, musicians. They're deep, thick, strong-minded people, and why on earth they'd want to be with it in any way except by knowing they could contribute, they can make it better, they're in something that they really, really are proud of. It's admirable to be near them. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and it grew through them, really. Their hearts and their breath built all the movement in that thing, I think. That I've done.
I heard you've written and will direct a new play, which is about to open in London. That's the What You Will you were talking about.
Yeah, right.
Is this, if this is true, can you tell us a little bit about it? There are some things that you left out, or you mentioned so early that it bears repeating, like where it's going to be and when.
Oh, well, it's at the Apollo Theatre in Shaftesbury Avenue, and it's from the 18th of September until the first week, the 8th of October.
And it says, and then interestingly, it says this is the first play that you've been in that you've written. No. We wrote a play a long time ago. I had an idea. I sent it to the BBC when I was 13 in an exercise book, and they sent it back, and they said, this is rubbish, and rather in the way that I suggest we all progress in this business. And I was playing Hamlet, and I had 3 days off, and Rick was in Stratford, and rather than just rest and things, I told Rick this idea. I had this clever coup de théâtre for this play. Say that again.
Yeah, I can't say it once. You see why it takes me so long to practice and to rehearse, because I can't speak. But I had this very clever trick at the end of a play, and I said, if only there was a play I could put this in. And Rick said, well, let's write this play. And so we got a kitchen timer out, and we spent like 5 minutes each of us trying to write scenes and then swapping them over. And we finished up with a play called Double Double, which has been done all over the world. It's been done in the Moscow Arts Theatre, the Sydney Opera House. It's been done everywhere else except on Broadway. It's been done at Williamstown. It was a great, socking great big hit at Williamstown. It's 2 people, 1 set, and this trick which makes people stand up at the end of the play and say, I'm not leaving the theatre till I know how that was done. It works. It's a trick as old as Greek theatre, but it's something I love. I love tricks in the theatre.
For the first production that Roger played in the West End with the aforementioned Jane Lapatere,
right.
Oddly enough, Roger was also the set designer. But so that it wouldn't look too obnoxious on the window card for it to say Roger Rees in a play by Roger Rees, designed by Roger Rees.
What's wrong with that?
You see how his ego has changed, because back then in 1985, Roger was too modest to take the credit as designer, so he took the letters of his name, and great anagrammist that he is, he came up with the name Rose Greer. And so it said, designed by Rose Greer. So it says...
But I needed a photo, do you remember?
Yeah, I remember the photo. The photo was the picture of Nancy Coyne, who owned the ad agency that I was working at. And she was wearing a big fur coat, and she looked fabulous, you know. She really, Rose was a piece of work. But it's so it says Roger Rees and Jane Lapierre in Double Double by Roger Rees and Rick Elice, because Eric is my legal name, and in those days I was still stupid enough to use my legal name, and designed by Rose Greer, directed by Roger Rees, and the critic from the Daily Mail, no longer alive, so I can, it was this production probably that killed him, said, Mr. Rees, who has done everything in this production, has improbably added a fake name of a collaborator, Rick Elice. Who could possibly have a real name like that? Because my first name, my last name are there's only 3 letters, you know, in both my names. But Rose Greer was right there and went right by Jack Tinker. Oh, did I say his name? Anyway, he's dead. Let's do another question. So many of these. Here's a Mel Brooks one, but I think you've talked about Mel Brooks, and you've talked about what it's like to co-direct. This one is about roadblocks in your career. Right. What's the biggest challenge you've had? What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And how did some things that seemed wonderful actually end up messing you up?
Well, did I say it's a volatile life? You know, you can be loved and hated and loved and hated.
Be specific.
I was the 17th person to be fired in a production called The Red Shoes. It was a big musical. It was 18 million, I don't know, 8 million, I don't know, it was a lot of money anyway. And they kept firing people because they thought that was what was wrong with it. And I think probably it wasn't what was wrong with it. But I was the 18th person, the stage manager, the director, the leading lady, it went on and on and on. And eventually I was the leading man, and I got fired 2 days before they opened. And I went down to Joe Allen's, shocked. Stanley Donen, who's a great friend of ours now, he was then directing it, had taken over, and dear Stanley took me to tea and said, "You're not going to be in the play tonight." Oh, okay. And then he left for the theatre, or as he called it, the studio. And I went down to Joe Allen's, and John Schlesinger was in Joe Allen's, and he said, "You look a bit upset." I said, "Yeah, I've just been fired from this musical I'm the lead in." He said, "Well, that's probably the best thing that could have happened to you." And indeed it was, because it opened and only played 2 performances and then closed, you know. So it was obviously something wrong with the play, and they just didn't know what to do, and they thought firing people. You know, and I've been in plays where people have been replaced. I've been in really, really upsetting, backstage, frightening personality relationships, horrible, horrible experiences backstage and in rehearsals, and these were some of the most successful things I've ever been in. So there's no rule, and no one knows how to do it. The example of Red Shoes was, no one wanted that to be bad. I was lucky enough to work with Julie Stein on that. Julie Stein and I spent hours in rooms singing together. He said, I'd never written for a guy before. It's so great. And he was pulling songs out of his trunk because he wasn't very well, but it was fantastic for me to be with him. And we all had a very happy time, but it just didn't work out. And things happen like that. But it is shocking to the system because you try to be good, and if they think you're the problem, okay, then perhaps you are. But you bounce back, and it's good to have practice at that, I think. So that was a big shock. I know that when my brother died in England, my mother was out there watching me in Hapgood. She was there for a week, and my brother, I got the news at the end of the matinee, and I took her to tea, and she'd been buying some presents for my brother, and I kept putting off telling her for another 30 seconds because she was showing me these things she'd bought for him. But eventually I had to tell her that my brother Andrew had died and we must leave the next morning to go back to London to sort out everything, and someone would play for me in the play. And Simon Jones' wife looked after my mum. She came and took her, and they spent the evening together. My mother was yelling out, "Why not me? Why not me?" You know, because she's lost her son. And that evening, I acted better than I've ever acted in my life. And I think about that, and I think it's because it was no longer falsely important. I didn't do all that thing, you know, in the gym when you go, that is completely unnecessary. All that the demonstration of how hard it is unnecessary. You just have to do it to failure. Just do it. Nike was right. Just do it. Acting, just do it. So I've had some tough things to deal with, but I think there's wonderful camaraderie. There's wonderful love. Love is really beating out cynicism in the theatre nowadays. I think it's a great thing, and I want to be part of that. I think it's a good thing.
Do you ever look back with regret?
No.
I was listening to that Red Shoes story, and I remember that when Roger was auditioning for the Red Shoes here in New York, he was also auditioning for that spring's crop of pilots in Los Angeles, and he was offered a pilot at the same time he was offered the this Broadway musical, and he had been on a couple of TV shows, but he had never been in a Broadway musical. So he decided to do the Red Shoes, and you heard what happened to that. And the pilot was The Nanny.
Yeah. I was going to be the guy, you know, that guy. Yeah.
Are you like me? I mean, because I would be kicking myself for the last 20 years about, oh, I should have taken the nanny, and why didn't I take the nanny?
No, you know what? You know, all of you in this room know this, that in the theatre, you know, like, you know, or in film, you know, like two things always come at the same time, always. You just have to choose, and it doesn't matter. You have to be zen about it and fatalistic, and just think, oh well, that's what I did. You know, it's okay.
Oh, you're not going to do it, Roger?
That was his former agent. As of that day, former.
People say to me in New York, they say, "Oh, you got a really nice accent," and I think, listen to you.
We'll close with Roger's story of how he became an American citizen.
Oh, all right. Have we got time for that? So you have to learn the 13 original colonies, and you have to learn.
You have to learn a whole lot of things.
A lot
it's
of
a
stuff.
test very few
you
of us
have to
could pass.
the three
branches
of government. Cookery. Anyway, so
Mr. Rees, Mr. Roger Rees.
so they call me in, and so I'm really frightened. I've spent up nights learning all this information about the American. I know much more about American history than anyone in the room. So I go along the corridor, and out of the door I'm told to go door number 19. A Chinese guy comes. I go in, I close it, and the guy goes, "Close the door." I close the door and I sit down. Do you know the 13 original colonies? And I learnt it alphabetically, and I could do it, and I did it. He takes a pencil and he ticks it. And he says, he looks at my passport, because you have to bring your passport. And he said, you go to Toronto a lot. I said, yeah, well, I'm in a TV show there called Warehouse 13. I'm the sort of villain. And he says, do you know Harvey Keitel? I said, no, I don't, not personally, but he is absolutely my favorite actor. And the guy says, mine too, he says. We spent about a quarter of an hour talking about all Harvey's films, about, the ones we like most of all. And at the end of that, we exhaust that subject, and then I have to sign a piece of paper to show that I can. I have to sign it to show that I can write in English, and I was an American citizen.
Without which he wouldn't be sitting here tonight. That's Roger Rees, everybody.